I'm a partner here at Politics and Prose, and on behalf of the store and the staff, we welcome you. Tonight we are here with David Denby, and he's going to be discussing his new book called American Sucker. It's just been published by Little Brown. And let me ask, is there anyone here who has not read his movie reviews in The New Yorker? Well, if you think you're here for a movie discussion, you're on the wrong flight, as the pilots say. He is, as I just mentioned, a film critic for The New Yorker, and he also wrote an earlier book, not about film, about the pursuit of fine literature, called Great Books, and this book is about the pursuit of something else. And with that, I'm going to introduce David Denby. He'll talk about his book. After that, he will ask questions. It is absolutely imperative, considering we have C-SPAN here tonight, that you use the audience mic, which is set up right in the middle of the middle aisle. That way, the questions will be able to be heard by everyone in this room and in the listening audience. So if you have a question, please use the audience mic, and David Denby will respond. So, American Sucker by David Denby. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Danny. I don't have to tell you, because you're here, how important your loyalty to stores like this is, and how much it's appreciated not just by the store, but by writers. We know what kind of services these places provide, and it matters a lot to us. I will talk about movies at the end of this little presentation before I pitch into my tale of exhilaration and woe. I will just put on my other hat for 1 second. I'm not going to talk about Mel Gibson's movie now, because if I start, we will talk the whole evening about that. But I will be happy to talk about it at the end. But I just want to, for those of you who haven't seen it, I just want to put in a mention, a plug for Charlize Theron's performance in Monster. A lot of people, I think, have stayed away from it because it's an unsavory subject. The real-life prostitute and serial killer Eileen Wuornos, who was executed in Florida in 2002, is the subject. And what's remarkable about this performance, which I think is a shoo-in for the Oscar, is that it's not just the transformation of a beautiful woman who was a former model and ballet dancer into someone very desperate and not beautiful, but also it's a real performance, it's a real interpretation, it's an internal transformation as well as an imitation. So, all right, how did a film critic and a writer of a book that Danny mentioned called Great Books, about going back to college, Columbia in my case, and rereading the Western classics. That was Great Books, a book I did 7 or 8 years ago. How did he get involved in the stock market? And so far astray from his normal preoccupations? Well, I'm hardly the only one. And I must say we are complicated people with many strains and currents and cross-currents running through our lives. And I think what I've done here is essentially written a money story that's enfolded within a crisis of the middle years. I won't say a midlife crisis, because I think Oprah has taken a patent on that phrase, and no one else really should use it. I think what you have here is the record of insane behavior by a basically sane person, and the writing of the book is a way of reasserting sanity. It's a record of a bad time, of an unhappy time, of a manic time, but I hope I've given it the kind of shape which makes it appeal as an actual human experience that might befall anyone. The circumstances, in a few sentences, were these. My wife of 18 years, with whom I'm still very close now, even though we're divorced, Kathy Shine, a novelist, announced about 5 years ago that she was taking off in search of a new reality, and there was no way of arguing her out of it. After about a year of holding on, we parted. And I concocted a scheme which now seems completely daft, and at that time seemed only half daft. And that was to hold on to our apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I don't know about Washington, but in New York, all stories become real estate stories sooner or later. You're all laughing, so it may be true here also. One of the things that's ironic here is that there's nothing extraordinary about this apartment. I mean, it's a nice piece of turf on the Upper West Side of Manhattan of 7 rooms, but it was the second floor. It was a lot of rather dark, no place to put a car, and so on and so forth. But the point is, it was home. And it was this dowdy writer's apartment where we had raised 2 boys and written a great deal, both of us, was where I wanted to spend my days. And I went through one of these kinds of things that you go through, I think, in your 50s, which was that I couldn't see anything beyond it. I couldn't see anything. There was nothing but death out there if I left this apartment. So the plan that I conceived, since the stock market was booming, this was late '99, and particularly the tech end, which had been booming with extraordinary strength in particular since late '94, was to put a good deal of our liquid assets, with her permission, into the tech end of the market and to try to make enough money quickly. I mean, I even bandied around the figure in fantasy of $1 million in a year or two in order to buy her out, her share of the apartment out, and hold on to it. I don't want to be totally unfair to myself. There was more than just a get-rich-quick and euphoric kind of mania here. It was also a very exciting period, and I still believe a lot of this, a period in which we were going to invent new technologies to bind the world together, to exchange enormous amounts of information instantaneously. I was very excited and became very excited about biotechnology and so on. The market, of course, is a way of being, for ordinary Americans to be part of that. I became obsessed. I would watch CNBC and the other financial channels a couple of hours a day. At the New Yorker, magazine, which is a kind of high-minded place where you're not supposed to watch television unless you're checking facts. The fact checkers, are allowed to watch television, the news broadcasts, but and I would sneak off to a room where there was a set which had a nice eastern view of the public library, and very inspiring at market close, all that light coming in. I piled up internet magazines in my office. They were kind of these 500-page things. Like underfoot, they're highly unreliable as something to stand on, I can tell you that. And the Wall Street journals grew from ankle height to thigh height to waist height. David Remnick, the editor, would stand at the entrance of the office and look at me dismayingly. I don't know about here, but in New York in the 50s and 60s, Jewish mothers would terrorize their children by screaming about the Collier Brothers, if there were even 2 magazines or newspapers lying on the floor. The Collier Brothers, for those of you who are not witty, as they say at the CIA about these things, were 2 fellows who piled up so many newspapers that they died in their apartment and couldn't get out. I recreated the Collier Brothers in my office. And I felt pulled in 2 directions at once, spiritually. And in your 50s, I think you begin to experience time in a different way. Well, it's just the commonplace that Americans always think of themselves going up some endless hill, but finally you get to the point where you realize you don't have an endless number of days. I wanted to catch up and to speed up as much as I could, partly because of this market-induced mania, to catch up to the future in the present, to catch up to the ticker going across the bottom of the screen, to catch up to the headlines going around the old Times Tower at the base of Times Square. Now Dow Jones controls we call it the Zipper in New York, which is right across the street from the New Yorker's office at Times Square. At the same time, I longed to slow down, and I had slowed down when writing this book a dozen years ago, reading Hegel and Kant and Montaigne and Plato and so on at the rate of 5 or 6 pages a day. I longed to slow down and experience duration in any way that I could, whether it was having dinner with friends in a Roman square, or those wonderful Roman dinners that begin at 9:30 and end at 1:30, or even a piece of music or lovemaking in any way I could. And the cutting rate of movies, by the way, particularly a lot of the spectacles, not the independent films, just in recent decades, has driven me nuts as it's gotten faster and faster. And I don't think it's just a function of age. I think in that case there really has been a change in the way movies are edited, and it has to do with the development of commercials on television and the realizing that people can take in information. I also think since the conglomerates have taken control of the movie business, that they really have changed the aesthetics of movies in such a way that they don't want you to feel anything. Remember all those movies in the 40s, the whole point was to engage your emotions in the story as much as possible. I think now what they want you to feel is just excitation, which then vanishes. The minute you step out of the theater, the tingle goes away, but there's no aftertaste, there's no imprint, and that has partly to do with the way these movies are cut. All right, that drives me nuts. In New York, maybe not so much here because there's so much government business, but in New York 5 years ago, at the peak of the market bubble, you can't speak of a peak of a bubble, can you? I get my metaphors straight before the night's over. The atmosphere was manic. On January 10th, 2000, I left the apartment at 76th Street in West End, stopped at a newsstand, and then walked to the subway to go to the New Yorker. Before I went into the subway, some guy shouted the name of a cell phone company at me on the street. Complete stranger. "Ericsson," he shouts, and disappears into the subway. I confronted him a couple of weeks later. I saw him on the train. I said, "Weren't you the guy, you?" And he said, "Yeah, I saw you. You were listening, pretending to buy an automobile magazine at the newsstand, and you were actually listening to the guys exchange tips. The Pakistani vendor was high on Ariba, a business-to-business software company. One of the buyers was touting Vitesse." I said, "Oh, great." I said, "By the way, did you buy Ericsson?" He said, "No, I bought Nokia." So he was playing me. He was a prankster. Well, someone at the office noticed that I was behaving strangely. Brilliant editor named Henry Finder, and said, "Keep a journal." You see, when writers go crazy, they go crazy in a slightly different way from other people. You can be behaving badly, and I was behaving badly. I put an enormous amount of money into the tech end of the market. I was sexually misbehaving, all the desperate things and unhappy things that people do after a marriage breaks up. And by the way, there's been a lot of writing by women of what happens, and fiction and nonfiction, about what happens after divorce, not that much by men. And there's been some resistance to this book, and I think part of it is I've broken 2 taboos here. One, a so-called humanist intellectual, quote, unquote, and critic has talked about money, with which everyone is obsessed, particularly in New York, but it's considered infra-dig to discuss these things in public. And B, a man has talked about falling apart after a divorce. Anyway, when a writer falls apart, it's a little different, because as he's behaving badly, there's another part of him that's watching the bad behavior, noting it down. That part of him is not quite such a fool. That part of him is calculating, cunning, crafty in both senses of the word. I mean, if you're any good. And I kept a journal, and it became an article in the magazine in April 2000, The Quarter of Living Dangerously. On the basis of that, it became a book. And, you know, if I have any talent as a writer, leaving aside the movie stuff, in these two books, I think it's for identifying some lack in myself or some stress in myself and trying to make the connections between that and something going on in the larger culture. And as I was going through this and noticing this mania all around me, I thought, this is a moment. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I may sink, I may swim, but this is a cultural moment that in time will be as defined as the Roaring '20s or the Depression or the counterculture '60s. I've got to get this down. I've got to get the names, the faces, the attitudes, and I've got to make it read like a novel. It's got to be as rich and as complicated and as contradictory and as wild as possible. I will say this. Someone said to me in New York, did you do all this and then lose all the money in order to write a book? Answer, no. I would, much as I love literature, I would not recommend to any young writer that he or she lose a spouse, an apartment, and a small fortune for the sake of literature. Definitely not a good career move. I went to investor conferences. I chased after new technologies, and as the market peaked, I was highly exhilarated, and if you recall, the NASDAQ reached 5,048, that's the index, on March 10th, 2000, and then began to buckle. Although it held on, it's partly recovered in the summer. As late as Labor Day 2000, it was around 4,100. It then really pitched down at the end of the year. But as it began to buckle, and I realized that how little I knew about these things, as much as I was trying to teach myself, I just determined to try to meet a couple of high flyers, at least in New York, who would lead me into the future, who understood these technologies and the way they were being represented in the marketplace. And the two names I'm about to give you, who I settled on, will indicate that my journalistic instinct was as sound as my financial instinct was hapless. Because the two people were, number one, Sam Waxel, Martha Stewart's friend, who is now moldering in federal prison in central Pennsylvania for 7 years and 2 months and is bored out of his skull, as he wrote me. He is the biotech entrepreneur, the former CEO of ImClone, which had and has an anti-cancer therapy for advanced colorectal cancer. This was the drug that was turned down by the FDA on December 27th, 2001, not because it doesn't work, but because Sam had hustled the trial procedures and had ignored the warning signals from the FDA. He then committed the crime of insider trading, and through various means, his friend Martha found out about it. The rest, you know, she's now on trial for the same thing. He's an extraordinarily charming and intelligent man. And I was only one of many people, many of them a lot shrewder than me about such things, who were attracted to him. He held these parties in his loft, which were an attempt to revive the old idea of the salon, to bring together people in the arts and in the intellectual world and in journalism with people with money and power, and to make them bang up against each other and see what happens. And someone would give a talk, and I gave a talk about movies, not even knowing who he was. It was a total coincidence. I didn't know he was the ImClone. And I became very fond of him, and we hung out here and there, and he told me a lot about his stock, and I thought, his company and his technology of his drug, I thought he would lead me onwards and upwards. And the other guru is Henry Blodgett, who has now been banned from Wall Street for life and fined $4 million in a complicated deal between our magnificent state attorney general, Eliot Spitzer, will eventually be president of the United States. You heard it here first. And a number of regulatory agencies on the one hand and brokerage houses on the other. Henry has been banned for life from Wall Street and fined $4 million. He was the internet analyst at Merrill who, in 1998, announced that Amazon, which was then already priced very high, would go through the roof. And it did, much more quickly even than he said. He became an overnight celebrity. He knew a little bit more about the internet than other people, but he was actually a writer. Earlier, a journalist, a freelance writer, and a fact checker. One of us, for God's sakes. And and he's also very charming and smart and handsome. As I've written, he's not looking enough to be an actor, but he could have been, to be a star, but he could have been like in a 50s Jimmy Stewart Western, the heroine's disorderly younger brother who's always going off to town and getting into a fight or getting drunk. He has a kind of long face and interesting eyes and so on. And I spent quite a lot of time with Henry when I could and when he was free. And I've given both these guys, I believe, I try to work out my relationship to them and to give them as much space as possible to explain themselves, to justify themselves, and eventually to hang themselves. And it was hard to part with them, to come to the judgment that they had behaved unethically. Because you not only invest your money, of course, you invest your judgment in certain decisions like this. And to admit that you've been wrong means that your judgment is wrong. It's why one of the things that confirms you in wrong directions is you don't want to hear advice or information or evidence that's contrary to your desire. That's a human failing. It's not just an investor failing. How much does the Bush administration want to hear information that's contrary to its desire? So anyway, all of this running around did pull me out of my depression after the marriage broke up, and I would hardly recommend it as an investment strategy. You should never make any decisions, obviously, investment decisions, financial decisions, when you're in a state of distress. And I had the sense that old things were dying and new things were being born, but that by placing myself at risk, I at least got the blood pumping again, and as much money as I lost, and obviously we went over the waterfall after the market really began to tank. It did pull me out of my cave and get me going again. I was supposed to hand this thing in, or at least complete the reporting period by the end of 2000, but I thought I don't have enough of a story, so I kept it going into 2001 and 2002, and the market kept sinking, and I found it impossible to sell. And I hope I've recreated the psychology of this in a way that will be sufficiently realistic for other people. In part, as I say, you invest your judgment, not just your money, and you block out contrary advice. And there were many people saying it's going to come back, it's going to come back, and then it gets down so far you don't want to sell because you don't want to lock in losses, and so on, all the way through those different permutations. The turning point should have been September, for me at any rate, September 2000. I was in Squaw Valley up there in the Sierras in California with George Gilder. George Gilder is, some of you probably remember, as the anti-feminist and supply-side theorist who became a kind of fixture in the Reagan administration, and then took up technology, another guru to attach oneself to. And he, in particular, is fascinated by fiber optics and publishes, has a website, publishes a newsletter, which you can get for $295 a year for investors. And he has these conferences, and at this conference in September 2000, I was giddy, sort of from the thin air of the excitement of being with these people up high in the mountains. The fiber optic champions they were. They were like sheiks showing off their magnificent white stallions, one after another, boasting of how they were going to carve up this new part of the world, and boasting of the value of their companies, which were then at market caps of tens of billions of dollars. However, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal just before the conference began, and I had read it, and it said that the buyers for the products of these telecom manufacturers, of the fiber optic companies, the buyers, that is the networkers who were buying their hardware, had run out of money, like AT&T. This was the beginning of the famous telecom crash of 2001 and 2002, which was an appalling destruction of value. They had simply run out of cash. They had laid millions of miles of fiber optic in long-haul networks in the ground. Most of it was unlit, that is, not being used, because broadband is rolling out very slowly, much more slowly than any of us had anticipated. And these companies had issued a lot of debt to raise money, and they simply weren't buying anymore. And no one at this conference mentioned this article or this fear. It was all this boasting that I heard. And I heard something interesting at the conference. Playing under the music, under the boasting, was another kind of ground bass beneath it, which I detected. And that was, these guys were champions of entrepreneurial capitalism, and they had licked all other systems. They had licked the technological issues. The one thing they couldn't lick was aging and death. And when I would listen to Gilder, he's obsessed, and remains obsessed, with time, with the loss of time that's involved in standing on line, filling out forms, turning the channels of a radio or a television. The reason he wants an all-optical network, that is with everything moving at light speeds, is to save time so that we can download whatever we want. In other words, you download all of Leave It to Beaver, or all of the recent, news about Uganda, or whatever it is, rather than shuffling through things to find information. He wants to withdraw time from systems that a nanosecond at a time, a second at a time, or a nanosecond at a time. And I realized, as I listened to him talk, he was then 60, he wanted to like draw time from the end, to defeat death by pulling time away from death. And this linked up with things that I had heard Sam Waxel say and other biotech entrepreneurs, and I went to a number of these conferences. They want to lick Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and cancer, because these are dreadful scourges, and because they will make a fortune from the marketing of these drugs. But they also, and these are boomers mainly, maybe a little younger than me, don't want to get any older. And that's another reason they want to lick these diseases. That is, they want to continue to be able to party, to ski, to make love, to think as if they were still 45 or 50. And at that moment, as I was undergoing my own crisis about time passing, the philosopher Martin Heidegger said that we are rushing toward our past. And what does this bizarre conundrum mean? Well, the only experience we have of time, the present is just a continuum, right? There is no stable present. There are no fixed instants. The only real experience we have of time is the future, the time in front of us. And then it goes by us and becomes our past. We're rushing toward our past. Well, and as I was thinking that and experiencing that rush, which you don't experience when you're younger, when you think you're going to live forever, I found this blasphemy against life of these groups of men who are trying to, not die, very appealing for a while. Well, I fell, as you may have gathered, and our portfolio went down quite a lot. I sold out the individual stocks. I'm sorry to say, pretty near the bottom, but held on to the funds. So, from which I draw the lesson that if you get kicked in the stomach, or in my case, you kick yourself in the stomach, it's probably better not to get out altogether, because then you miss the recovery and you're being stupid twice. So the stuff has come back a little bit. Now, one of the things that this is about is the suppression of anger. When Kathy took off, I refused to become one of those awful men complaining about women all the time. You meet them in offices, in bars, in the subway, everywhere, and a refusal of anger. And my anger did finally come back after 9/11, because we all, as you did here, I'm sure, also suddenly felt things like, my children are not safe in this city. And also, of course, came the scandals. And not just Enron, and I guess many of you know Mr. Skilling was arrested and indicted this morning. Jeff Skilling. And not only Sam Waxel's insider trading, but many, many others. And I try to pull myself out of my obsessions at the end of this book and try to make a kind of Aristotelian framework. What's important in life and where does greed fit into it? I became angry about the unethical behavior of so many people in the inside. For instance, at this Gilder conference, there was a fellow who spoke named Henry Nicholas III, Ph.D., as he styles himself. He is and was the CEO of Broadcom, which makes the chips for the set-top boxes that are attached to cable modems. And he got his board in 2001 to vote, award him options to buy his own company shares at a lower price, which he then sold at an enormous profit, realizing $799 million at a time when he knew that the market for his products was contracting. Is it illegal? No. Is it unethical? This whole options thing and the way that it makes CEOs behave, I think, is extraordinarily destructive. It causes them to try to keep profits up, or to fraudulently claim profits from quarter to quarter, in order to impress Wall Street, and sometimes to line their own pockets. And I think that has to be regulated. It took years of work to get so many people into the market, and it reached about 50% of the population in the Clinton-Rubin years, and probably has maintained that way. I mean, from the beginning of the first Roosevelt administration, when the Glass-Steagall Act and the Securities and Exchange Commission were set up, and many other things. And these things never go in a straight line. Of course, there was the insider trading scandals, I'm sure you remember, of the 80s, Michael Milken and Ivan Boesky and so on. But it took years to get people to see the market as a way of brightening their future a little bit, as a way of being part of the adventure of investment and of invention and so on. To dissipate that trust is horrible. It hasn't even, and the latest scandals in the mutual fund industry have not caused people to pull their money out of the mutual funds, mainly, I think, because there's nowhere else to go. Bond yields are very low, and bank CDs are barely keeping you even with inflation. But it is a horrifying way of toying with public trust, the way some people have behaved. So if I began with greed, I ended with ethics, and or an attempt at it, and I did learn to stretch out time again and endure and enjoy duration moment by moment. And I think now I will shut up, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, if not just about this, if you want to talk about the New Yorker or about movies, or as well as market, that would be fine. And I think you have to go to speak at the microphones.
Just a quick comment. If
Sure.
you've been here last night listening to Brian Greene,
Yeah.
who's a physicist
Yeah,
at
sure.
Columbia, there is no time. So it's okay. I just wanted to reassure you.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, in your book, you mentioned the Italian director from the 60s, Antonioni.
Antonioni, yeah.
Yeah. As far as duration of time, how he stretches
La
out time.
Ventura, La Notte,
Yes.
you remember these
Beautiful
films?
movies.
Yeah. And
The-
they're often very long-lasting shots in which you can feel time passing, right?
The one movie recently which gave me that similar experience was Lost in Translation. Could you comment?
Well, I think it's a lovely film. I don't want to overhype it, and I don't want to set up false expectations for Sofia Coppola. I mean, I think it's a small, delicate talent at this point. What you've got in that movie, what you're talking about, I think, is observation rather than the kind of dramatic hyping that of plot, and crises and so on that you get in most Hollywood movies or in a typical television show. I mean, and that was why I think it became a very hip movie among kids, in particular college kids, because it gets away from all the phony melodrama that's in so many movies. But I also, the downside of that positive, for me, was that I think after about 2/3 of the way through, the movie begins to freeze, and you get a slight feeling of irresolution that she doesn't really know what to do with it and what's going to happen yet. But the level of observation, the humor, the warmth, if any of you have ever been in a large modern hotel in Tokyo or Osaka, you know how accurately and amusingly she got that whole atmosphere. Yes.
Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I guess it was a year or so ago when Jack Barsman finished From Dawn to Decadence. He was being interviewed by Charlie Rose, and during the
Right.
colloquy, Mr. Rose asked him what the value of an undergraduate education was, or a liberal arts education, one similar to the same as you received. And one of his answers was, or in his response, was something along the lines that proves to be a sturdy companion and during life, and especially in hard times. And given your own experience in going back up to Columbia and taking CC in Humanities, and where you've now been in the last few years, have you revisited the syllabus, so to speak?
Well, there are all of those Sophoclean dramas of delusion and self-knowledge. My troubles hardly compare to Oedipus, but certainly I thought about blindness. You can think about blindness even as you're going through it, and wonder. And I thought about what being a citizen should be, and how far I had gotten from an ideal that, of course, the Greeks assumed a much greater participation. In Aristotle's sort of politics of how it should go in Athens, you rotated in and out of office, so to speak. Of course, there weren't that many qualified citizens, but these were not democracies. It's always said the Greeks invented democracy. But to be a citizen, you had to be a second-generation Athenian, and there were a lot of slaves around and so on. But still, the notion of rotating in and out of office is so far from our, what's in it for me, and each person a kind of fortress moving through the air, repelling invaders. And I was upset by what had happened. And I was also upset by how large a role such backstairs weaknesses as envy and snobbery played a role in one's life, and particularly perhaps among intellectuals in New York who pretend not to be interested in such things but are more than ever. And at the end of the book, drawing on Aristotle, I tried to make a kind of scheme of what are the ends of life and what matters to us, how do we define our character, and where could greed, what I had gone through, what many had gone through, possibly fit into that. And I don't know that I've come up with a satisfactory scheme, and I don't want to, it's hardly a zinger of an ending, but it's a element in my trying to resolve these issues for myself, to try to make a kind of ethics for big shots and to say what matters in life and what doesn't. Yes.
David, it's nice to see you. I
Hi.
saw you on, I believe, on CNN, and it's definitely,
It's possible.
yes, it's definitely more warm to see you in person. With that
Thank you.
being said, have you?
Those intros, those softening intros are always terrifying.
I know. I'm a New Yorker, so I'm a
Oh,
big
good.
fan. New York and DC, that is. Did you systematically invest before this whole?
Mess.
Yes. And
Yes.
do you? Okay. Do you have a structure in place before then?
We, my wife and I invested in insanely. That is, we diversified domestic and international funds, and large and small cap. What you're supposed to do, and some in bonds, and we did fine because everyone who did that did fine in the late '90s because the market, was going up. The S&P 500 went up over 20%. What was it, 5 years in a row? And we did fine until I got cocky and stupid. So I've now gone back to the common sense wisdom. Although, of course, there's always that little glimmer. India, China, nanotechnology. But no, I'm still titillated. I'm just not obsessed. Obviously, to put more than a tiny fraction into anything speculative is insane.
And one more question.
But I defend the stock
Okay.
market and investment as a part of the excitement of American life. You can't get away from big money also if you're a movie critic. And by that I mean, I may hate the way movies are made and distributed now. I hate the structure, and I'll explain that if anyone's interested. But the fact is that I feel bereft when I don't like at least some of the big Hollywood product. I don't like being in a kind of cranky, sore, rancorous, oppositional position, and the last thing you want to do is fall into the trap of panning every kind of big movie just because you think they're made corruptly. So I'm happy, as I was in this past fall when there were big movies that seemed to me to have some real substance. Master and Commander I thought was quite good. Cold Mountain I enjoyed quite a lot. Lord of the Rings, of course, and best of all, Mystic River, which I think is Clint Eastwood's masterpiece and a remarkably somber and pessimistic movie for a big studio. Clint was asked what his favorite movie of 2003 was, and he said, that Matrix thing, and he couldn't even remember the name, and he said, because the Warner Brothers executives were so obsessed with the success of that thing, they left me entirely alone on Mystic River. It's not a healthy system, what we've got here now. First of all, the end loading of quality. To use the awful jargon, they've monetized the award season, right? Not just because of the Oscars, but because of these crumb bums at the Golden Globes. You know who the Golden Globes people are? They're the foreign press. Many of them don't write very much. They're hairdressers and chauffeurs and consumers of hors d'oeuvres at press parties, and they accept gifts from the studios. If you hear a certain acerbic tone here in my voice, you are correct. And because of studio collusion and because it's a warm-up for the Oscars, they've managed to turn that show into a major event in which the actors, of course, all get sloshed because they don't take it seriously and have a lot of fun. So all of the good stuff is held for the end of the year. It's as if the audience IQ went up 40 points on October 10th. That's one thing that's wrong. The other thing that's horribly wrong is that movies now, for marketing reasons, open on Fridays at 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 theaters. Big movies. Not Mystic River did not open this way. It opened slowly. It's so-called platformed. That platform slowly opened. Let word of mouth and let critics, in this case, help, spread the word. Moviegoers spread the word. But normally this is avalanche of publicity directed towards the Friday opening. And including the press has been pulled into, co-opted made part of the promotional process. When you open the newspaper on Sunday and you see an ad for a movie that's opening the following Friday, and this thing is garlanded with masterpiece quotes for a movie that hasn't opened yet. Those aren't excerpts from reviews. No one's reviewing a movie that, in the Sacramento Bee that's about to open the following Friday. After all, it takes a while to make up the ad, right? And everything, so that all of that must have... No, what happens is the critics are junketed to New York or Los Angeles 15 or 18 or 20 times a year, put up at a very nice hotel, shown the movie in advance of the opening, 2-3 weeks ahead of the opening, given 5 minutes with Tom, or with Tom, or with Julia, or with Sean, which, if they're unscrupulous, they will write up as a one-on-one interview for their hometown paper, and in return for which they trundle down to the publicist's office on Sunday and give a blurb, a quote that then runs in those ads. Is it illegal? I repeat my question before. No. It's business. But is it journalism? No, it's not that either. And so in that way, everything leads up to that Friday opening, including a lot of the press. And then by the weekend, the end of the weekend, they may have decided to expand or contract the run. Why so quickly? Because television advertising is incredibly expensive. So sometimes by the time the weekly critics come out, the game, so to speak, is over. We still have an effect on reputations. And that matters in Los Angeles, of course, and in New York and many other places. But very often we have no effect whatsoever on box office. And so now if you're following this paradigm, and it all depends on the opening weekend, who goes the opening weekend? Well, it turns out all their studies show that the largest part of the audience that goes on opening weekends are males aged 15 to 25. So in other words, that portion, because of this peculiar scheme that they've evolved for marketing movies, that portion of the population exercises an influence on taste way out of proportion to its numbers in the actual population and in the movie-going population. And that's why there are so many teen comedies and so many thrillers of a certain kind and so much fantasy. Now, there's the family audience, which is very important, and I did like Finding Nemo, by the way. Last role for Albert Brooks to play an anxious fish after years of stumbling around trying to find the right role. And there's the adult audience, which suddenly catered to on in October until Christmas Day. But it's a corrupted system in a variety of ways. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed your book. I finished it Sunday in preparation to be able to tell you that. And,
Thank you.
So many of the things that you talk about are, things no one I've ever read really talk about, from being obsessed for a while with internet pornography to, being, I too, when our portfolio was going up like $7,000 a day, I was plugged into CNBC, and when it turned the other way, I just,
Yes.
totally turned it off and said, I'm never going to go back there. But, what else, what other game is there in town? What I really liked, I think, most was you kind of conveyed the shifting sands we're all trying to negotiate as we are negotiating our baby boomer, changing bodies and situations and our children growing up and their needs. And I really, really, really felt it worked on so many levels. The only distressing note was at the end which I thought was very brave of you to even estimate, but to be rich you needed 2 residents and $5 million, and that seemed like I wasn't going to
This was not rules for you and me. I mentioned, this is what I was trying to say before. I tried to set up a kind of, are there any practical limits on greed for big shots, for insiders? Is there a point, and maybe it's foolish to say this because either you're greedy or not, either you have ethics, but is there a point beyond which you're no longer trying to earn money to have a few nice things or to have a house in the country, which is a very nice thing, and you're just turning yourself into an instrument in order to make more and more money. At which point you're corrupted and it's changed. So that's what I set up a kind of scheme there. We actually put a number on it.
So
And it has
somebody
upset
could
certain
finally
people.
stop and say, "Okay, I've made it."
I've made it.
That
Yeah.
that was very humane.
That
of
was
you.
the point. Yeah, but some people have thought that I was suggesting that this is a goal for all of us, and of course it's a great deal of money. It was like $5 million in 2 Places to Live, which is certainly beyond any writer's capacity that I know. I do know Stephen King very slightly. It's not beyond his capacity. He's such a nut, though. He's perfectly happy sitting in a room writing all day long and not. Yes. Anyone else?
Yes.
Have any of the movie studios expressed an interest in making a movie of your book? And if so, who do you want to play you in the movie?
Vigo can do it. It's a bit of a stretch. Yes, there is movie interest, believe it or not. But I will say no more than that because and of course it's highly amusing to me. And these things tend to evaporate if you talk about them. It would need a lot of work, the script, to give it a kind of more of a plot. But Jack Nicholson was maybe some of you saw About Schmidt, which was about a man whose wife dies and who's untethered. So there's some precedent for this sort of thing. Yes, sir.
I'll ask only because you alluded to it at the beginning of your talk. Have you seen the Mel Gibson movie?
It is appalling. Appalling. My review will be out Monday in the New Yorker. It's very difficult to write about because he has branded anyone as anti-Christian who criticizes what he's done. Of course, the torment of Jesus Christ and the crucifixion are central to Christianity. Of course, these things have been represented in art, in Christian iconography, Catholic and Protestant, for centuries. And the suffering of Jesus is represented very powerfully in such things as, there's a fantastic painting by Andreas Mantegna, and in the Eisenheim altarpiece by Matthias Grunewald, great German Catholic artist. And there's a lot of Spanish painting during the Inquisition, which is, I find, suggestive, that gets very violent and explicit about blood. But nothing has ever been done like this. In effect, with some pauses, some flashbacks, and the trial scenes where Jesus is hauled before the Jewish priests and then before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. With those pauses and those scenes, apart from that, you were, in effect, watching a young, mostly naked man being tortured to death for 2 hours. And painting a fixed image does not have the visceral impact of cinema, and a lot of it is in slow motion, and it's blow after blow after blow, lashing, flaying, beating, and I'm talking about 3 sequences that go on for maybe 10 or 15 minutes each. And I don't know how you can come out of it feeling anything but rage, or I felt horribly depressed by it. And the thought that millions of people are bringing their children to see this really